almost as if the guy was refereeing a football match rather than part of a bloody tragedy. And the question immediately came to my mind, this is a terrible demeaning of human life, the human life of both sides, when the BBC is reduced out of fear of criticism to reporting the events of this region as if they're reporting the outcome of a football match. I would like to add just one more point, that there's been another interesting development in BBC coverage, whereby they always refer, when they do, it's less and less, to Ariel Sharon's involvement in the 1982 Sabra Shatila massacre. And they always refer, because the Israeli embassy always points this out, to the fact that the Kahan Commission report into the massacre, which concluded in 83, said that he was only indirectly responsible. Here again, there's a diminution of the truth, because although the basic content of the report makes this remark, the sum up of the report, the final conclusions of the Kahan Commission report, page 103 in the English edition, actually says he is personally responsible. But the word personally has been dropped also from all BBC references to Sharon's connection with Sabra and Shatila. So we have this continuing chipping away at the truth to try and make it amenable, to try and avoid the criticisms. It was interesting, though, and here BBC reporters in this region were quite cheered, that the BBC, despite absolutely predictable and utterly slanderous claims of anti-Semitism and doing things for Hitler's memory and things like this, in that they produced this program called The Accused, which was about Sharon's involvement in the Sabra Shatila massacre, they did go ahead and show the film. And it was interesting that immediately after they showed it, all the accusations of anti-Semitism against the BBC just stopped. They had obviously failed to achieve their purpose, so they were abandoned. And you would have thought that a major, especially British broadcasting organisation, Britain after all is not providing helicopters and missiles, that it would have had the courage to carry on. But indeed these memos that I'm referring to, with the diminution of truth that they imply, actually followed after the showing of this program called The Accused.
Well, I want to thank you very much. Robert Fisk joining us from the Independent newspaper of Britain, on the ground in Jerusalem, has been with the Independent for more than 20 years, based in Beirut, Lebanon. We will continue with Noam Chomsky in just a minute. After that, Winona LaDuke and Ralph Nader join us. They have a new organization. It's called Democracy Rising, and thousands are rallying behind it. Stay with us. You're listening to Democracy Now!, the exception to the rulers. I'm Amy Goodman. On Sunday, the New York Times headlined that after 6 months, the Bush administration was planning a change in focus. The Times explained that Bush would now focus his attention on a, quote, vigorous discussion of values and an emphasis on, quote, themes that strike Americans in a more emotional, personal way. As the Times rhapsodized about the Bush administration's change in focus, the U.S. Navy continued bombing Vieques. The DEA resumed its aerial fumigation of Colombia. Condoleezza Rice continued to warn that the U.S. might bomb Iraq at any time. Colin Powell continued to insist that the UN bow to U.S. demands in its upcoming World Conference on Racism. And U.S. officials of all stripes continue to defend U.S. efforts to undermine or scuttle international agreements on global warming, small arms, and biological weapons and tobacco control. We might be forgiven for asking just what has changed. Noam Chomsky, last year you wrote the book on rogue states, arguing that the U.S. is seen as much as a rogue state, is seen as a rogue state by much of the world. Can you talk about the international reaction to all this and how Bush, in his months in office until this big vacation he's taking, compares to Clinton?
Well, it's true that the United States was seen as a rogue state in much of the world. In fact, that was recognized even in perfectly mainstream journals like Foreign Affairs, and that's extended. By now, the U.S. is regularly referred to as a rogue state, even in Europe and even in England, which is the most subordinated country to the U.S. And it's pretty obvious why. The litany that you ran through is a good part of it. The Bush administration has, in fact, made it very clear that it's not going to pay attention to world opinion. It's going to move ahead pursuing what they call U.S. interests, which is not the interests of the U.S. population, but rather the interests of the extremely narrow sectors that Bush represents and that got him into power. There's a change from the Clinton administration, but we shouldn't exaggerate the change. So the major policies that are being pursued that are in fact frightening the world are simply extensions, maybe escalations, but extensions of Clinton administration policies. Maybe the most extreme of these is the militarization of space, which is now impossible to conceal for a long time. National missile defense has been described in the framework of what's called strategic deception in the technical literature. That is, you pretend it's one thing when it's really another because you know the population will be against it. That has to do with the current shift to talking about values. You have to try to calm the growing opposition to what they're in fact doing. So under strategic deception, which was incidentally an official policy right through the 80s on so-called Star Wars, under strategic deception, you pretend that we're somehow defending ourselves. So the word defense is in there. But now it's becoming impossible to conceal that what's really going on is an effort to expand the arms race into a new frontier, what's called the high frontier, through militarization of space. That means dismantling the treaty framework which has prevented this, not just the 1972 Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty, but also the 1967 Outer Space Treaty, which the U.S. signed, but in recent efforts to reaffirm it, this is under the Clinton administration, the U.S. has voted against it. In 1999, it voted against the world. The U.S. was supported only by Israel. In 2000, again, U.S. and Israel opposed it, joined this time by Micronesia. They want to block, this is Clinton, to undermine the Outer Space Treaty because that stands in the way of the expansion of the militarization of space, in which the U.S. is much more advanced than anyone else technologically. And this is for offensive purposes. It's not even disguised. In fact, there was an article in the Times Magazine a couple of days ago, which did give the essentials. This is for development of offensive weapons from space, which can be highly lethal. And as strategic analysts and foreign countries point out regularly, strategic analysts here, the purpose is not defense. It's to establish global hegemony. And the Space Command, Clinton Space Command, has been very explicit in saying that this is simply another move carrying out the traditional role of the military. Armies protected the settlement of the West. Navies were developed to protect commercial and investment opportunities abroad. Now the militarization of space will perform the same services. This is unconcealed in internal documents, in fact emphasized. Just as navies operated in the past, the militarization of space will operate now to guarantee U.S. global domination, ensuring that recalcitrant elements don't react, protecting U.S. commercial interests and investments throughout the world. Now with an escalation, a sharp qualitative escalation of the possibilities of lethal force for destruction, it's also recognized that this is very harmful to U.S. security for pretty obvious reasons. Others are well behind in the advance into militarization of space, which probably could be canceled because of overwhelming agreement in the world that this is highly dangerous. But they'll react. Potential adversaries are not going to sit there, just as in the case of armies and navies. They will react. Germany built a powerful navy to counter the British Navy. Others did too. They'll react, and they'll react in ways that are easy for them. So they won't develop anti-ballistic missile systems, but they will develop anti-satellite weapons once that barrier has been broken down by the U.S. Undermining of treaties. They'll develop anti-satellite weapons, which are far simpler than anti-ballistic missile defense systems. anti-satellite weapons will completely destroy any U.S. system in space. Therefore, the U.S. has to be so powerful, has to maintain such overwhelming force in space, what's called full spectrum dominance, that it can overwhelm any effort by anyone to disrupt the U.S. system of control of space, which means vast escalation of the offensive military capacities in space, which will simply elicit further reactions, and sooner or later it'll blow up. In fact, there's a phenomenon in the technical literature called normal accident. That means the kind of accident that takes place unpredictably and sporadically in any complex system. And anybody who uses a personal computer knows what that means. For unexplained and kind of like random reasons, something suddenly goes wrong, it crashes. Well, when you get a very complex system, of course that's going to happen. And when your personal computer crashes, you may lose the last email you wrote. When the militarization of space system crashes, as it will under normal accidents, you blow up the world. So the choice really is, does the U.S. move towards hegemony or towards survival? And that's not a new dilemma. It goes back to the origins of the contemporary arms race. So, say, 50 years ago, the only security threat to the United States, and it was potential at the time, not real, was the development of ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles. Thanks. Alzheimer's showing. Intercontinental ballistic missiles with hydrogen bomb warheads. That was potential at the time. Very strong likelihood that it could have been terminated. The Russians were way behind. They had every advantage, every reason to want these systems not to be developed. The histories of the arms race, like George Bundy's, point out that there apparently was never any consideration even of the possibility of moving to terminate these weapons, which were potentially of very great danger to the United States. And it continues, without running through the details, right through that. The record is consistent in indicating that the values, to pick the word of Bush's PR advisors, the values are hegemony, not survival. And that continues today. It's being increased substantially by the Bush administration. That's true. But these are Clinton-era programs.
Well, on that note, I want to thank you very much for being with us, Noam